Hey everybody, welcome back to Code for Teachers. Welcome to episode 2, where we're going to be talking about prints and variables. Before we get into our coding environment for the first time, we want to go over the basic concepts that we'll be reviewing in this episode. We're going to start from an assumption of zero knowledge about programming, so if any of you do have some experience, this will definitely be some review, but it's important to think about the bigger picture of our thought process here and not just jump right into code. Because if we can write code but we don't know why we're doing it, then not only are we losing something, but when we go to teach it to our students, we'll be missing part of the picture, or we won't be transmitting as much of the information as we need to. So the first thing that we need to understand and eventually convey is that a program is a set of instructions. Those instructions are written in code. So they're instructions given to the computer, and code is just a general term that we use for any programming language that we will be using. The language that we'll be using for this episode and for this season, I suppose, is Python. When we write lines of code, they are executed from top to bottom, and they're interpreted or compiled. In the case of Python, they're interpreted. But that top to bottom, that ordering really does matter. Later, we'll learn some structures that we can use to modify that top to bottom a little bit, but generally speaking, the computer reads its instructions that we've written for it from the top of our script to the bottom. Programs work with information. Computer science is the science of how information is handled, generated, mutated. So we can think about those different operations as kind of the general domain of programs. Parsing information, maybe that's reading information from a file, maybe that's dealing with user input. Modifying information, so maybe we are updating a database, or maybe we are adding 2 to everything in a set of numbers. And creating information, adding new things to a set, or creating a new user, or uploading a picture to a photo sharing website, or uploading a video to YouTube. So programs work with information. Generally speaking, although it's not necessarily the case, that programs usually produce output. You could write a program that works with information and then doesn't do anything with it, but that's really not that useful. So programs that we will write, and that everyone really does write, in the real world, produce output. Now, output comes in a lot of flavors. It could be raw text, it could be images, it could be a web page, it could be a video game. So for right now, we're going to use very basic versions of output, but just know that that idea of input coming into a program, the information being parsed, modified, or created, and then output resulting is kind of our general workflow. Okay, so with that, we're ready to move into our programming environment. So right now we're looking at REPL.it, or Replit, and REPL is short for the read eval print loop, which we'll learn a little bit more about later. But this is a great service that is an online interpreter for multiple programming languages. You can see right here that we have a search bar where we can type in a language. And if I hit the drop down, you can see that there are so many that we have available to us. And maybe later we'll explore some of these other languages. You'll also see in 2 different places on the screen that it's asking you to start here if you're a teacher. Replit for individual users is great, but also a Replit Classroom is really fantastic if you want to run a programming class. We'll talk more about Replit Classroom later once we've mastered some of the basics of actually coding for ourselves, and then we'll be able to give that to our students. So you can just get started with Replit. You don't have to make an account, although I highly recommend it. So if you want to make an account for right now, there's no reason to create a teacher account. So you can click on sign in, and then sign up, or just log in with Google, GitHub, or Facebook. I usually log in with my Google account, and that's the way our students log in. So if you want to create an account, go ahead and do that. So if I'm right here at the start, or if I were in that sessions section, what I want to do is I want to search for Python 3. Okay, and because I'm in incognito mode, it's asking me to sign up or log in. So that's one way that you can get there. I'm going to switch over to my own Python 3 session, and we can look at the interface from there. Okay, here we are logged into my session for Replic. Up here you can see my session title, CFT 1-2, and over here is my account name, including sessions, which is one way I can start new sessions. Let's walk across the interface here just to see how we can manipulate our environment. I have 3 big buttons here: share, save, and run. Save will make sure that the latest version of your code is saved. Run will run the program that you've written. Share will allow us to create a link directly to this session. So if you want to collaborate with others or show your code to someone else, that is how you do that. Over on the left hand here, we've got the settings button. If I click on that, this other column expands, showing me another way to create a new session, and some layout options, some theme options. I'll tell you that I usually work in dark mode just because it's easier on my eyes, but light mode's easier for video, so I'm going to keep it there. I'm going to close the settings for right now. You can explore that on your own. This button here, just in terms of completeness, is for using multiple files in the same program. We can do that, we can separate our code into multiple files, but we won't be doing that for the time being, so we'll leave that alone. Nor will we be using the debug or libraries buttons. Now you'll notice that my interface is separated into 2 halves, a light half and a dark half. So the light half is my scripting window. That is where I write my Python code. And the right-hand side is the Python shell. Now, the left-hand side is, you can think of that as kind of input, and the right-hand side as output. I will see the results of my program on the right-hand side. So let's do that. Let's create a Python program and see what happens when we run it. I like to start with the traditional first program in a programming language, the Hello World program. So we're going to use the print command to print some text to the output. So that's going to go print, and you'll notice as I print that the autocomplete in the interpreter is going to try to help me out. Parentheses, also notice that it completed the parens for me. Quotes, it also completes those. Hello world. Okay, so I have 1 line of code. Let's run it, see what happens. Hello world. All right. So congratulations, you've just written your first Python program. You are now officially a programmer. Now, this small program tells us quite a few things about the language, actually. The first is that we have a function or a command called print in the language, and we will know reserved words or keywords in the language because they'll turn blue in our interpreter, so that's useful. We know that print is a function because of these parentheses that come after it, and functions take information that determine their behavior. So we gave the print function some text, hello world, and that's what in fact printed out. We can infer that any text we put inside these parentheses will be what gets printed out. So let's try that on a second line. Print, I'm a programmer, and run. Okay, so that worked. I got my second set of text. Also notice that both lines got printed out, both hello world and I'm a programmer. That's because, like we said in the beginning, that Python is going to run and interpret, or rather interpret and then run, or execute the lines of code in order from top to bottom. So when we hit that run button, it's going to see that first line, do that, and then the second line, and then do that. That's an important concept. So if we wanted only the second line to run without deleting this first one, we actually have a way to do that. And that way is comments. I'm actually going to put some space between the top of my file and my commands so far, so I can put in a title comment here. Comments in code are for humans, not for the computer. They're a way of putting text inside the body of the code so that I can explain myself to whoever else might be reading the code. Single line comments in Python are denoted by a pound sign or a hashtag, depending on your age, I guess, or however you identify that shape. And I'm going to say my first program. Now this line will not be interpreted by Python as code. It knows that this is just a comment, it's for people, not for computers, so it's going to leave that alone. Now we also use comments to disable code that we don't want to run, but we don't want to entirely delete. So I'm going to actually comment out this second line, and we'll be back to only printing hello world. All right, sure enough, that worked. Now, saying hello world is great, but it's not that specific, and I would like to be able to greet other people, not just the world. So I'm going to comment out this line too, and I'm going to start making a little bit of a more useful program that takes a variable. Variables are containers for information, and we use them to, rather than always printing out the same thing or reusing calculations, storing information that we can refer back to. So let's make a variable called name. To do that, I'm going to write the word name. Notice no quotes. I just have the letters NAME equals, and then we'll use my name for now. You don't have to, but I'm going to. It would be weird if I used your name. So if I look at the anatomy of this line, I have the name of the variable, in this case name, a single equal sign, which is the Python, it's Python for I'm assigning value to this variable, and then the value we're assigning it to, or we're assigning it, which is the text taggart. Now, in Python, we call text inside of quotes strings. And strings are one kind of information. We can also work with numbers and other types. But we'll be working with strings, and strings are inside of quotation marks. They can be single quotation marks, they can be double quotation marks, but we need the quotation marks. Otherwise, Python's going to think that you're talking about a variable or some other part of the language, and it won't know that you just want raw text. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to write a print command that takes and uses the variable name. So print, we know that part so far, and then let's try just name. Notice I don't have any quotes around name, and what should happen is that name will refer back here, and then I'll have that substituted in when I do the print command. Okay, that worked, but it's not really polite, right? I'm not saying hello, so I need to modify my print command just a little bit. To do that, we're going to do something called string concatenation, and that takes advantage of the plus operator. We haven't talked about this yet, but you can actually do some short lines of code over on the right-hand side inside the shell. If I click on the right-hand side, you can see that I can type in here. And what we're going to do is I am going to use quotes to write out in my first name, and then a plus, and then taggart. And let's press enter and see what happens. So that returned the result of that plus operator. Now, I don't want you to get confused, 5 plus 5 works just fine as well, right? We can use the addition operator on numbers. But if I use it with strings, it will concatenate them. So just kind of squish them together. All right, so if I want to combine the name variable with hello, then I'm going to have the string hello, comma, space, plus name. Let's think about that for just a second. So I have that comma space. Why do I have that space there? Well, if I didn't, then my name is going to squish up right against that comma, and the computer doesn't know that that's grammatically incorrect. It just will do what we tell it to. So I have to make sure that that space is there if I want it to look right to humans. If I run that, it looks okay, but the English teacher in me bumps on the fact that we don't have punctuation. So I'm going to concatenate one more time and add an exclamation point to it. There we go. All right. So just a quick review. We've learned about strings. We've learned about string concatenation. We've learned about variables and how we name them and assign value to them. We've learned about the print command and how we pass information as strings to it. And we've learned about how to make comments inside of our code that allow us to preserve lines that we might not want to use or to add detail for human readers. In our next episode, we'll do a little bit of numeric work inside of our Python, maybe work with some real numbers. And we will also touch on conditional statements, our if and then and else, that allow us to control a little bit more granularly how our program runs. Okay, that's it for this week, and thank you for watching Code for Teachers.